Between Christmas and New Year, Ghislaine Maxwell was found guilty on 5 charges connected to sex trafficking, including sex trafficking of a minor. She faces up to 65 years in prison. Maxwell was, of course, a close confidant of the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, who died in 2019 in a New York prison. The jury's verdict on Maxwell was damning, and the story made waves across the US and across the world. The response of the British press, though, was pretty odd. In the immediate wake of Maxwell's conviction, the BBC invited Alan Dershowitz for comment. Dershowitz was Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer. He is also, along with Prince Andrew, one of the high-profile men accused by Virginia Giuffre of sexual assault. However, none of this was mentioned by the BBC when introducing Dershowitz. He was simply introduced as a constitutional lawyer. This is what he said.
Well, I think the most important thing, particularly for British lawyers, is that the government was very careful who it used as witnesses. It did not use as a witness the woman who accused Prince Andrew, accused me, accused many other people, because the government didn't believe she was telling the truth. In fact, she, Virginia Giuffre, was mentioned in the trial as somebody who brought young people to Epstein for him to abuse. And so this case does nothing at all to strengthen in any way the case against Prince Andrew. Indeed, it weakens the case against Prince Andrew considerably because the government was very selective in who it used. It used only witnesses who they believed were credible, and they deliberately didn't use the main witness, the woman who started the whole investigation, Virginia Giuffre, because ultimately they didn't believe she was telling the truth. They didn't believe that a jury would believe her, and they were right in doing so. So it was very smart on the part of the government.
So to get this straight, after a rich and powerful person was convicted of sex trafficking minors, the BBC's first port of call is to invite one of their confidants on to discuss aspersions about another alleged victim. And no, Alan Dershowitz, Ghislaine Maxwell being convicted of sex crimes does not vindicate her lifelong friend, Prince Andrew, nor you. He was not challenged on any of this, even when he went on to say that Giuffre herself should now face trial.
And the other question is, who else will be charged? Because the testimony introduced evidence that other people were guilty and involved. Again, Virginia Giuffre, she was alleged by the same women who the jury believed to have brought them to Jeffrey Epstein, knowing that they were underage, getting undressed, having sex with Epstein in front of them when they were underage, in order to encourage them also to have sex with Epstein. So I think the next question is, when will Virginia Giuffre be indicted and charged, rather than her accusing people like Prince Andrew and me and Ehud Barak and George Mitchell and the dozens of other people who she's accused? So the next question is, who else will be charged for facilitating Jeffrey Epstein's misconduct?
So the big takeaway from the BBC's post-trial interview with a legal expert is that the real villain in the successful trial of Ghislaine Maxwell is one of her alleged victims. And anyone else that this alleged victim has accused is therefore innocent. The decision to platform Alan Dershowitz was widely condemned on social media, and the next day, the BBC issued this statement. Last night's interview with Alan Dershowitz after the Ghislaine Maxwell verdict did not meet the BBC's editorial standards, as Mr. Dershowitz was not a suitable person to interview as an impartial analyst, and we did not make the relevant background clear to our audience. We will look into how this happened. It's a welcome apology, although it's worth noting that beyond describing Dershowitz as not a suitable person to interview, the BBC still failed to state that he stands accused of multiple counts of sexual assault or sexual abuse. And there was no pushback about all of the aspersions that he cast about that alleged victim. That's what I think was, almost as shocking as inviting him on in the first place. The bizarre reporting of this case doesn't end there, though. So a day after being forced to apologise for platforming Dershowitz, the BBC inexplicably invited Ian Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's brother, onto Radio 4's Today programme. They did that. He went on to defend a convicted sex offender. You'll hear first the interviewer Michelle Hussein recounting some of the witness statements given in court.
Let's go back to what was actually said in the trial and the accounts that the jury believed, the accounts that corroborated one after another from these four women. One of them saying that your sister had given her a topless massage when she was 16. Another one saying that your sister told her she had a great body for Epstein and his friends before touching her breasts. Another one saying that your sister was the one who showed her how Jeffrey Epstein liked to be massaged. Are you saying to us that all of these women are lying?
No, I'm not saying that they are lying. It may well be that they were victims of Jeffrey Epstein, but I do not accept that they were victims of Ghislaine. And that's my position. And that's also her position.
Which would have to mean that they were lying when they said that she was the one who introduced them to Epstein, that she was part of the procurement of them for Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, your sister was an integral part of Jeffrey Epstein's life, wasn't she? She was running his home. She was at his side. We saw all the photographs during the trial of all the time they spent together, all the places they went together, how intertwined their lives were. If what you're saying is correct, it would mean that she was at his side and had no idea what was going on.
That's the impression that the prosecution wanted to give you. I think there was something like 100 photographs out of 37,000. None of them were dated. Most of those look to me from about 1992, 93. It's designed to paint a picture. And of course, the prosecution didn't put into evidence the prior interviews that they had with these accusers prior to trial, which showed a completely different case. Memory is faulty. So in my view, the trial that has occurred was not a fair trial from Ghislaine's perspective. And that is why she's going to appeal, and I think she'll be successful.
What the hell is going on at the BBC? Ian Maxwell, he's entitled to his opinion, whatever, but it is not normal 2 days after the conviction of a sex offender to invite the guilty party's family onto a primetime slot. This was a Today programme, Radio 4's sort of most significant show, to suggest the jury got it wrong and then to cast aspersions about the memory, motives and reliability of the victims. And I say victims now, not alleged victims, because the facts of this case have now been decided by a jury in court. Ash, are you aware of any other instance where the first thing the BBC did in response to someone being convicted of sex offences was to invite one of their alleged co-conspirators as an expert and then to let their sibling in a primetime slot tear into the accusers?
No, this is completely out of the ordinary. And so anyone from the BBC who is telling you that this is normal media coverage and the mistake in getting Alan Dershowitz on was simply, a kind of procedural snafu, the wrong overworked producer dialed the wrong phone number or something, is completely for the birds. The key question is, what is it that makes our media so vulnerable to elite manipulation? Because this is exactly what's going on here. Is Alan Dershowitz, Ian Maxwell being given these kind of platforms is a form of elite manipulation of public opinion. It is a very naked attempt to smear and besmirch the reputations of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers, and indeed Alan Dershowitz's accuser and Prince Andrew's accuser. It is an attempt to get the public to cast doubt on the validity and the integrity of the judgment. And neither of those things would be possible. That access to platform would not be possible unless these two men were connected to the kind of elitist establishment that the BBC also finds itself a part of. One of the things that's very often said when you try and understand things like this by defenders of the establishment is that cock-up is always more likely than conspiracy, to which I tend to reply, well, why not both? It is the fact that the media is dominated by a kind of journalistic logic and moralistic framework which is completely devoid of integrity that makes it so vulnerable to this kind of manipulation, because you have, from producers to presenters, a sort of shared buy-in to the logic of, well, if I can get someone close to the story, that means I've done a good job. I've got the scoop. I've got the access, and that's all that matters. What kind of questions you put to them, or indeed whether or not they should be questioned in this setting at all, as opposed to, say, I don't know, a court of law. Those things are completely secondary, if not just ignored entirely. And I do think that sometimes there are elements of active conspiracy, whether that is a kind of benign conspiracy of, well, these seem like reasonable chaps. So, we should get them on to say their piece, which is a luxury which would never be afforded to, say, people accused as part of Rotherham grooming gangs, or indeed the siblings of those people. And indeed, perhaps, considering the BBC's history with regards to Jimmy Savile, I don't know who's working there. I don't know if they've got any experience of turning a blind eye, or indeed some kind of active participation in this kind of behavior. But what this means is that regardless of whether it's that kind of lazy elite solidarity or something more sinister, or what the precise balance is between cock up or conspiracy, is that the media is simply not able to defend or advance basic journalistic integrity or be fair to these women who've already been cross-examined, who've already had their private lives and every detail of their personalities and sex lives torn apart, ripped apart for public consumption. And I think that one of the things which is most shameful about this case is, even though we are all faced with the same set of facts which tell us that something has gone grotesquely awry, that these young women, these girls, these, in some cases children, were left so unprotected to predators, and that they weren't believed, and that there was the active complicity of the state in giving preferential deals to Jeffrey Epstein, essentially to allow their abuse to continue. Is that in addition to all that, you now have a media industrial complex which is traipsing after abuse apologists simply because they think it makes a better story. No, actually, the story people want is the one which has got some integrity, some fairness, and something which has got the facts fairly represented in it, which is not what you get from a Dershowitz or a Ian Maxwell interview. It's absolutely shameful, Michael. And I know this shouldn't shock me anymore, but it did.
A sense in one way this has been reported is, they invited them on because they thought it would make good TV to have someone who was close to Ghislaine Maxwell to make the defense, or good radio or whatever. But it would actually be, not just on an integrity level, but also on a sort of an engaging listen. If they ask the more interesting questions here, which is, as you say, how did Jeffrey Epstein get away for this for so long? How did he get 18 months in a prison where he was allowed to leave every day after he was originally found guilty of sex crimes? How did Jeffrey Epstein move in all of these incredibly powerful circles for so long? Was his abuse connected to his access, or was it incidental to it? How did he get so rich, considering we don't really have any explanation of that? Were there connections to aspects of the Secret Service? These are all incredibly interesting questions that would make really good radio and really good TV. But instead, the BBC won't touch any of those things because they think, that's a little bit controversial. That might come around and bite us in the arse. That might piss off some powerful people. Instead, they invite the brother of someone who's just been convicted of sex trafficking minors, and they invite the previous lawyer of the guy who died. Under what circumstances did he die? Another very interesting question to be asking. I'd listened to that radio show, but instead we listened to his lawyer who completely, unprovoked, a jury has found this woman guilty, Ghislaine Maxwell, they have found this woman guilty, and all he thinks is relevant is to go on TV and say, well, the real story here is that one of the accusers, in fact, the accuser that accused me, should not be believed. That's what they've decided was TV worth watching. And I think that can kind of only be from conspiracy. They're worried if they cover the real story, it will upset people who their jobs rely upon. It's too risky. It's too risky because the people it would upset are too powerful. Upset powerless people doesn't really matter. Like, I imagine that if you were, one of those witnesses, who's just gone through a very difficult trial, and you then hear a very powerful man casting all these aspersions about you on Radio 4 Today, then that would be fairly upsetting. But if you upset them, it doesn't really matter. If you upset someone who took regular flights in Jeffrey Epstein's plane, or was a very close friend of Ghislaine Maxwell, then maybe you'll have someone who has your phone number, who is a WhatsApp contact, who will say, do you not want to be careful here? Because I've got friends in powerful places. And that's not the kind of hard-hitting journalism they're willing to do. Those aren't the questions they will ask.